Thank you. And move live. Thank you, everyone. And here we are. And we'll just give a few moments while our friends begin to join us, both on YouTube, Facebook, and of course here on the Zoom webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I would like to say, please, if you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share with the panelists, please use the Q&A box, and that's for our friends that are joining us on the webinar. For our friends joining us on Facebook and YouTube, I will be monitoring the chat box, so please feel free to use that. And I encourage everyone to chat liberally and share their thoughts as the panel moves on. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Stamp Chat. I'm Heidi Rhodes. On today's Stamp Chat, we'll be remembering Mr. Morris Rosen, an APS life member, collector, and Holocaust survivor. Mr. Rosen collected mail from ghettos and concentration camps and exhibited mail from the ghettos of Poland. He spoke openly about his experiences during the Holocaust and engaged others through his storytelling and his exhibitions. He's remembered fondly as a collector and a man brimming with joie de vivre. Joining us today to talk about his extraordinary life are Jake Rosen, Morris's son, APS member Danny Spungen from the Florence and Lawrence Spungen Family Foundation, and Scott English, Executive Director of the APS. We invite you to ask your questions, share your thoughts and reflections. Stamp Chat is a production of the American Philatelic Society. Since 1886. The APS has served collectors with the services and support that they need. With 28,000 members across the globe, the APS is your gateway to philatelic networking, research, and international camaraderie. Join the hundreds of thousands who have enjoyed membership, including APS Life member, Mr. Morris Rosen. Whether you're an experienced collector or just beginning, the American Philatelic Society can meet your needs. Visit stamps.org and join 135 years of fellowship in the hobby. And with that, friends, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on Stamp Chat.
Thank you. I wanted to do just a little bit of setup. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I got 2,200 words in the American Philatelist to talk about Morris. Unfortunately, I never got a chance to meet Morris while he was with us, and I took a pretty long journey to get to know him after the fact, being able to communicate with Jake and with many of his close friends, people who've known him over the years, and it's been a tremendous journey to learn more about him. But the most important part of this was being able to hear Morris himself. Even though we never met in person, Morris did a wonderful thing. He did first-person interviews with the U.S. Holocaust Museum as well as with Gallaudet University, and he was also recorded by local television stations in Baltimore, Maryland. So after really talking with Jake first, I went through probably about a 13 or 14-hour journey just listening to Morris tell his own story in his own voice. And for me, that was incredibly humbling to get to know the man a little bit more. The reason why this drew some attention for me is because since I became the executive director back in 2015, we've gotten involved in a couple of different projects. The Holocaust Stamp Project was the first one in Foxborough, Massachusetts, that spawned other projects around the country, including one in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is called Stamp It. They have successfully collected 11 million stamps as well. The Stoughton High School in Stoughton, Massachusetts started the program. Unfortunately, the pandemic set things back for them, and we're now working with a project in Canada as well. It's my hope that we're able to continue to grow out these programs. Given the historical data that we see right now with polls going around, interviewing children who are in middle and high school, there's a big gulf between those who, one, understand the implications of the Holocaust, believe it even happened, or have any real understanding of what it means. And unfortunately, as we've gotten to this point in time, we've lost so many Holocaust survivors. I mean, think about this. Morris passed away at the tender age of 98 last December. He was 16 when the Germans invaded Poland. And so he was a remarkably young man at the start of World War II, at least from his perspective, and still a very young man when the war was over in 1945. But at this point, we have to rely so much on recorded evidence. But it's going to take us, the next generation of people who are still here to tell their story, to be able to carry on that mission and make sure that people understand that. That's why it was really important for us to invite Jake, obviously, because he knew Morris the man probably better than anyone else, and Danny Spungen, who is put a remarkable amount of work into preserving the philatelic material that it records what happened in the ghettos and in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. And as those projects continue on, we will be opening our own exhibit. As I mentioned, we partnered with Foxborough Regional Charter School for the Holocaust Stamp Project in 2018. When they finished collecting the 11 million stamps and all of the educational material that came with it, the program organizer basically said, gosh, we don't know what to do with it next. And we thought a museum would be interested in it, but no one would. And ironically enough, although we already house millions and millions of stamps here, we willingly took on those 11 million stamps. And they're already in a display that I think will be quite remarkable when everyone's able to see it. Our plan now is to do an official dedication of the exhibit in April of next year on Holocaust Remembrance Day at the end of the month. So that is something that will be forthcoming. I will continue to update our members on that project, as well as other projects that we're working on. So real quick, just to sort of set the stage, I want to do a couple of different things. First, I'd like to hear from both Jake and Danny to talk a little bit about Morris the Man. And then, of course, we are a philatelic organization, and many of you got to know Morris because he was an exhibitor, he was a collector, he was a philatelist, he was a friend. And really be able to talk a little bit about Morris the philatelist as well. Before we kick the questions, I have received an overwhelming amount of response from APS members, those who never met Morris and those who've known him for years and shared wonderful memories with me. So I want to share some of those with you just to let you know the ripple effect that Morris had on our hobby. And Jake, although you're not officially a collector yet, I always use the word yet. Remember, you are either a collector or you're not a collector yet. I know that you were able to spend time with your dad going to different philatelic events and Olympic events. And so I'd just like to kick it off, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about your experiences with your dad and in the philatelic world, and let me know when you're ready to get started on collecting.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for having me here, Scott. I really do appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to remember my father. Philatelically, my father was such a passionate collector, and that stemmed from his childhood, really. When he was a kid, he knew the King of Poland collected stamps, and he thought if it was good enough for the King of Poland, it was good enough for him. And that was a way he got to learn. That furthered his education because he learned about the history of the stamps and what they actually represented. During the course of the Holocaust, my father's collection was taken away. He survived 5 concentration camps, 2 death marches, and then eventually immigrated to the United States. And then he started up collecting again in the 1950s. And he said, I had this hobby when I was a child, let me start collecting again. And he just amassed an incredible collection and had just an incredible mind for stamps and for the hobby itself. He was president of the Baltimore Philatelic Society. And you're right, I did get to have the opportunity to travel abroad with him, as well as to many exhibitions around the Baltimore, the Mid-Atlantic area. And what strikes me is when I would go to these exhibitions, seemingly he would just know hundreds of people there. All the dealers knew him. People would stop by to chat with him. He was president of the Baltimore Philatelic Society, so he would have all his friends and acquaintances from the society. He would travel to Nojex, which was in New Jersey. He would travel to Pennsylvania. He would travel to Virginia, and he certainly exhibited in Hunt Valley, Maryland, which I think was prime territory for the Baltimore Philatelic Society to exhibit. And it was just a magical time because my father was the ultimate extrovert. He absolutely received joy and gave joy to other people. So it gave him energy to be around people. So him being at these stamp shows and having the opportunity to talk about his philatelic exhibit, as well as to see the other exhibits from other collectors, just gave him such great joy and seemingly furthered his purpose in life. He had lots of different purposes in life, but certainly this was a central one. He would educate a lot of people. He would find things out about stamps that nobody else knew. One of the things I had mentioned to Scott and Danny and Heidi, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, we were going over some things for today's presentation. And my father, since he was a survivor, he knew things from the ghetto and concentration camps that literally no other collector would know unless A, they were a collector, and B, they had actually lived through the era and lived in those times. So my father found one postcard, and the postcard basically was written from a concentration camp victim to his relative back in Poland. And the postcard had said, "I'm going soon to see Uncle Malcolmuvis." So who was Uncle Malcolmuvis? I said, "Dad, what does this mean?" He's saying Uncle Malcolmuvis. Uncle Malcolmuvis was Yiddish for the angel of death. So basically, this concentration camp victim was telling his relative, "I'm soon going to be put to death." And he was letting his relative know that. And nobody outside of a collector and somebody who grew up and understood that era and understood the ghetto slang, because that was ghetto slang, nobody who understood ghetto slang would have a knowledge of what that postcard really meant, what it represented. So that was, I think, one of the many things my father knew and that he educated others on. He had a wide variety of interests in philately. I think he skirted from the Olympics, which was absolutely a central obsession of his, anything sports related, but specifically the Olympics, to Holocaust material, and specifically in Holocaust, from ghetto material and from concentration camp material. He also, and I found recently, because I've been going through his collections, and I found books from Switzerland where he collected the various cantons of Switzerland. He collected Monaco. He was in Israeli philately, so he collected stamps from Israel. So he had a very wide-ranging interest. And just 2 days ago, I was in my dad's house, and I was pulling out these 2 old cigar boxes. And on the cigar boxes was written "First Day Covers." And it was airmail, and it was literally sent during the war from pilots in the war back to their relatives in the United States or elsewhere in the world. So I started flipping through these envelopes and these postcards, and here were these postcards from pilots and from various, from Navy personnel throughout the war from 1940 through 1945. And they were letters. You could read what these people had written to their relatives. I'm thinking, this is just another interest of my father. Just he would, anything he could collect, seemingly he would just stock away in different subjects.
Okay, thank you very much for that,
Sure.
Jake. Great stories, and I will openly admit, you gave me an incredible amount of time and had so many different stories to share with me when I first started out on this journey. I can't thank you enough for that.
You're welcome.
Danny, I want you to jump in. Before, I know you're going to show some of the material that you and Morris worked on together, but before you do that, you have to explain blueberry pie to everyone that's joining us today.
Well, yeah, I actually found pictures of Morris and blueberry pie. So I'm a collector, and I was a collector. Now I'm really in charge of a big collection for our foundation on Holocaust material. And I first met Morris in about 2009. It was my first trip to his home. And before we even got started on collecting and him showing me his Olympic collection, and then of course his ghetto and concentration camp material, he gave me some blueberry pie. He loved to bake. Is that correct, Jake? Was blueberry his favorite, or was that just the season?
So what happened was, My mom got too sick to cook, so he took over the cooking duties probably back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And he literally became this gourmet cook. Like I said, he had many interests. So in addition to philately, I mean, he was an active Holocaust speaker and researcher and translator. He was a gardener, and he started becoming a cook. And he would not look through recipes of cookbook. He would just create his own recipes. So blueberry pie was one of his recipes, and he would just collect these blueberries and he would bake a pie. And you were one of those recipients of those pies, and he was very
I'm
happy
sure
to
I was
hand them
one of
out.
many,
Yes,
I'm sure.
very many, very many. We always enjoyed them.
So my interactions with Morris it really was about the Holocaust and about genocide. But he was very, very, open and warming, just a warm welcome to his home. It was just unbelievable. And Jake was there the first time I met him. You came in at some point,
Absolutely.
and because I have
Yes.
photographs of the meeting, and that's how I got involved with Morris. He was like a mentor. He, along with people like Ken Lawrence, were the gurus. They were the experts on Holocaust, ghetto, and concentration camp mail. So I relied on them a lot, and he was just amazing, just amazing.
I think, Danny, and you can probably attest to this, once you go to my father's house, he had this huge collection, right? It was a museum quality collection. And literally, you would probably have to break away, because if you heard a story from my dad, it would never be a short story, right? It would always be this very long story that he would tell. And he just loved showing his collection in pieces. And it wasn't just philately, but he had other objects of artwork and other items in his home. And he just loved to talk about it. But certainly, specifically regarding the Holocaust in his collection, he could spend hours, not hours, but days and weeks, if you had the time to stay at his house. But he would have these lengthy conversations and just educate people about what he had and what the collection represented. So I'm just very happy you had the opportunity to come over to his home and meet him and take a purview of the collection.
Well, maybe just as a very, very, very quick introduction of how I'm even here. We had a family business, and I didn't do very well in school. I tell people I got a 12. I'm an ACT in English, so I don't read very well. So my parents realized that I was a collector. So I collected rocks, then coins and stamps, and I learned history through stamps, actually. And then by luck, I got a job at a work-study program, because my education was not great, working at Marshall Fields for Jacques Minkus Stamp Company. Back then, you could not sell Holocaust material. It was never even heard of back in the 70s. So I got a job in 1978 through high school and then through college, working for Minkus. And then I started working. And then after I sold my company, I decided I'm going to go back to a stamp show. I was actually looking for the inverted Jenny. But then I saw Ken Lawrence, a very well-known, I'm sure most of the people on this Zoom call know Ken Lawrence. He was selling his Holocaust collection, and he had a group of investors from Michigan that were going to buy it for the museum. And not knowing anything, I purchased a collection right there, right in Bellefonte, right at the APS Center. It was a big stamp show, a summer seminar, and that set me off. How exactly I found Morris, I was thinking about that, Jake. I don't know exactly who gave me his name, but I saw some articles, I saw some material, and I just called him. And he said, come on over. So I flew from Chicago, where I live, and I literally went to his home, and that's how it got started. And when I bought this collection, my idea was to find a way to, go into business with this material. Of course, that never happened. I met these survivors, and I just fell in love with them. So I was one of those students that would not mind spending the entire weekend. If I had a sleeping bag with me, I would have probably been there for a weekend for sure. And that's how I got started. So I want to teach history using artifacts, primarily postcards, letters, and related documents. That's how our connection got really strong. But then one of his pieces came to life. And at some point during this conversation, we'll get into that.
Danny, I know
I
my
don't.
father enjoyed meeting you several times, right? I know you went out to restaurants with him. You've been over his house and several times. And I can tell you he greatly, greatly enjoyed talking to you, meeting you with you, and just your philosophy on life.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have phone recordings. He would let me record conversations. Actually, he was there when I was making these recordings, and in many cases. So yes, I have a lot of some video, a lot of phone recordings, because when you learn from people like Morse, they speak with such authority that it's hard for me, who I'm still learning English, and they start throwing out these Polish and German names. There's just no way. I have to record and re-listen and listen. So the phone recordings are extremely valuable for me, and that helped me a lot. But he was gracious, and just, I miss him. I think about him a lot now. Of course, with Scott English bringing us together, I thought about him a lot.
So I will warn the audience. When we did this planned practice session a couple weeks ago, it honestly turned into a much longer conversation than I thought we were going to have. But that's what happens, right? These fond memories, these warm memories that we have. I want to make sure, just for the interest of time, I want to make sure that, Danny, we get a chance to look at some of the material you've got to present. And so, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us a couple of
Sure.
the items that you've got.
Let me share a screen real quick. Okay, so I'm sharing screen number 1. Share. And can you see the screen now? The envelope, the postcard?
Yes.
Yes.
You can see the postcard. Okay, I cannot see it, so you gotta tell me. It should be very clear. So I'm at Morris's home. I wonder if I can actually even show a folder, a picture of Morris. I don't know if you could see that or not. Well, anyway, this is a postcard this is actually Morris Rosen's exhibition sheet. And on the back of the sheet, it actually shows the Morris Rosen APS number 47550, and he stamped his little hand stamp. You can see that, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. So this is the first time I've used this Elmo. Elmo is a overhead projector system for computers, and it's much better now. I think you can see the detail in it much more clearly now, right? So
Oh yeah.
There you go, right here. I'm going to zoom in on this. So this was one of his sheets, and I look at this picture, a very famous picture of a lady named Mina Singer. Her married name is Waxberg, and she was the wife of Simon Waxberg, another Holocaust survivor. And I said to Morris, I know that lady. I have that picture from the family. And he was pretty surprised. Mina Singer was a Jewish inmate. She was actually assigned to be a capo. So a capo means that you're in charge of a group of women. The Nazis assigned these people to have this role. It's not a great role, but she was in charge of Jewish women, and she had to keep them in, quote, in line. Well, Mina Singer and Jake were from the same town. What's the name of the town, Jake?
Dumbrowa Gornicha. So my father would say he's from Dumbrowa. He abbreviated it Dumbrowa G, but Dumbrowa Gornicha is actually the full name of the town.
There it is right here, Dombrowa. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And Mina was in the ghetto there. So she was in several camps, and then she was on death march. And after the war, she had to bring the Allies to the pits, the grave sites, and they had the villagers dig up the bodies. And she was assigned that role. And Morris had that picture. And I said, Morris, I actually have the family artifacts from this family. And Morris was friends with Mina Singer, but he had no idea what happened to her after the war. So he has in his collection a postcard from Mina Singer. You can see Mina Singer up on top on the right here, Mina Singer. And a postcard from Mina to her family. And the postcard is very, very tiny in print. In the backside, you could see how detailed. I had the letter translated. It was very difficult. So I said to Morris, I can put you in contact with Mina Singer's husband, Simon Waxberg. So I had them on the phone, and one phone recording was from July 2011. Now I met Morris in his home for the first time in 2009, but I connected Morris with the family. So I literally brought the families together, and I found someone who actually knew Mina Singer. Now, what's very interesting, after the war, Mina Singer married Simon Waxberg, and they were in Germany. And Oskar Schindler from Schindler's List, he had nowhere to live. So Jewish refugees said to Simon and Mina, please, can you take in this good Nazi, Oskar Schindler? At first, Simon says, are you kidding? There's no way. But he was convinced that, no, he's a good Nazi. And Oskar Schindler and Oskar Schindler's secretary, Martha, moved in with Simon and Mina. So it's Oskar Schindler and his wife, Irina, and the secretary, Martha, and her husband. So that's the connection. It's an amazing connection. And when Simon passed away, I have all the family artifacts showing pictures of President Clinton with Martha, the secretary, and letters between Martha, the secretary of Oskar Schindler, to Mina and Simon Waxberg. And it all came to fruition when I found someone like Morris, who actually knew Mina Singer growing up, because Mina and Simon, they did one videotape, one interview for a Holocaust researcher, but she never spoke about her experiences, never, ever spoke about her experiences except for that one interview. Her family knew she had special privileges, being a capo. They didn't know she was a capo, but they knew she had special privileges, but she never spoke. It's only after Mina passed away that Simon, the husband, found the important need to speak to students. And we became very, very close. And connecting Simon and Morris, for me, was just amazing. So when Morris sold his ghetto collection to Justin Gordon, a very well-known collector and author of a book on the ghetto mail, Justin Gordon and I flew out to Morris's home for more pie, and they arranged the sale right on the spot. And as a gift, Justin and Morris arranged that I would be able to get this postcard as a gift, as a donation to our foundation. I love the story. It's an amazing, amazing story.
I think what's interesting and something you keyed on, Danny, is that Mina really didn't talk of her experiences. And, a lot of that's true from many Holocaust survivors. They come to the United States and they really wanted to create a new life here. And it's not that they wanted to forget about their old life, but they wanted to fully integrate themselves into American life. And part of that was really not talking about their experiences. Most of my relatives, they really, they survived the worst and they never, ever talked about their experiences. But my father did. And one of the reasons he did was, this was probably back in the 1980s or late 70s, when the neo-Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois. My father learned of this, and he basically told me he would never allow this to happen in his newly adopted country. It was horrible enough it happened in Poland and Europe. He said this will not happen in the United States. And that's when he said, I have to educate others. And that's when he started out giving speeches, talks, going to lots of schools, universities. He spoke to the NSA, to the Army bases, and especially at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Wherever he could, anybody willing to listen, he would teach. He would tell them of his experiences. So it doesn't surprise me when you mentioned Mina really did not speak of her experiences, because I have found, especially with my own relatives, that to be a very true statement.
Many, many survivors did not speak. Those who did, I respect, and those who didn't, I have to respect, because
Absolutely.
of the pain and suffering they endured. So everybody deals with pain in a different way. But those who do speak, great. And for those who can't speak, these postcards, these artifacts, these letters, the concentration camp mail, the ghetto mail, we try to bring them to life. And in a very controversial way, I bring this material to schools. Now, Morris had this in a little piece of plastic, this postcard, but we try to preserve them the best we can and let students and adults pick and touch the artifacts and hold them. And it's just totally amazing.
So, Danny, I'm really interested in, because you've got a lot of experience about this in terms of conveying this story to school-age children. How do you approach it when you're dealing with, say, middle school or high school students? I don't want to assume you don't talk to elementary school kids, but I don't know. And how are you able to deal with such a sensitive topic when it comes to presenting this stuff?
Well, it was people. There's one collector and author and a very famous man named Robert Yan Van Pelt. He was the expert witness for the movie Denial about this guy in England who denied the Holocaust, and then he sued an author in Deborah Liftat in Georgia. And Robert Yan Van Pelt was also a stamp collector. He said, Danny, when you talk to students today, you have to start from the beginning. What is a letter? What is a postcard? You know, most kids going to college say they probably never licked a stamp. It's all self-adhesive, right? So we have to go start from the beginning. What is a letter? What is a postcard? And I actually make postcards for students saying, here, please take time now, write a little postcard to your grandparent, to your sister, to your brother, to anybody. I will mail it for you. You got to get them into that mode of what is a letter. Because before MySpace, your space, iPhones, your phone, before all that stuff, the written word was the way that we communicated. Now everything's an instant text message, and then the text messages are wiped out. So I try to explain to students, what is a letter? A letter is like an email. There's a sent, there's a to, a from, a date. And I show a cancellation saying this is a cancellation. So you try to connect a letter to an email. So that's the first thing. Now, I don't speak to very young students. I tried, it doesn't work. The youngest I've ever really spoken to was a 4th grade class. And I just talk more about letters and postcards and let them touch old postcards from World War II, of that nature. But when you get into the high school level, or even 8th grade, you can get into more detail. They know about the Holocaust. They don't know about the Holocaust per se, but when they're learning about the Holocaust, they get a feel that it was not good. So I do have to go from the beginning, what is a letter and postcard, and show them the importance of a letter and a postcard. Because stamp collecting, letter collecting, writing letters, it's just not popular today as it used to be. So I like to get them in that mode. And then when they get to pick up the letters and postcards, that does help bring it to life. And if I know the survivors behind the story, behind the words, behind me, the singer, as you see right here, that helps a lot. It helps a lot. So that's, and then they really do enjoy it. They really do, for that moment, for as long as I have them. And sometimes I'm at school for one day or a whole week. I get them engaged. I really do. And I'm pretty hyper and passionate myself. And I tell them this is how I learned through picking up things and collecting. And they learn to appreciate that fact. Did I answer your question? Was that good?
Yeah, no, that absolutely was fantastic. I appreciate that. Jake, from a little bit more of a personal side, you obviously are the second generation,
Right.
but and when when I was working on the article, I asked for pictures, and you sent a picture of your daughter and your son with Morris at and you said if there was one picture that you could use, please use this one, and it was the only picture we ended up using in the magazine at all. The editor really was hard on my space, and so, but I absolutely wanted to use that picture because for me that picture was more important than any other picture that I've gotten, because it's now that's the third generation removed from the Holocaust. And Jake, I don't know, I don't want to get too involved in the difficulties of having that conversation with your family, but what is it like to be able to convey that to them? They got the chance to talk to Morris directly, but are they able to sense the gravity of it and and carry on that sort of legacy that he left behind too.
Absolutely. So to my father, having lost so much of his family during the Holocaust, right? He lost his parents, he lost brothers and sisters. Family was the most important thing to survivors. And, my father, when my children were born, Hannah was born, when Michael was born, he'd occasionally look at me and he'd say, this is proof Hitler did not win, right? I have grandchildren. Hitler did not win. So he absolutely, his absolute joy in life were his grandchildren. And his grandchildren, as they got older, they certainly recognized my father being a survivor. Each of them visited the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They knew of my father's collections. They spoke to my father, extensively. It got so, I think, the last few weeks of my father's life, my son from college, and he's an engineering student, so he has a very, very busy college schedule as a junior, but he would call my dad every single week to talk with him and see what was up. And likewise, my daughter still thinks about him every single day, as does my son. They understand the importance. It's a huge loss in their life. I mean, as well as so many other lives, just an incredible light was extinguished. But this was really their sole surviving grandparent. So he meant the world to them, and they absolutely meant everything to my dad. So they try to carry on. They understand his story. My father, when you ask Danny, what do you tell students about the Holocaust? My father, when he spoke to people, and certainly he never told this to my children, he wouldn't tell the worst aspects of the camps. And, my father got into a fairly good camp for his first camp, and then things went gradually downhill. He experienced 9 days on a train without food and water. He slept on dead bodies. When he got to Buchenwald, the first thing when he went through the gates, he saw mounds of dead bodies. He once told me, the first time he saw cannibalism was in Buchenwald, when he saw gypsies, they were starving gypsies, eating people who were not yet dead. I mean, how do you relate? How can anybody relate? To call it horrible doesn't even do it justice. How can anybody relate to that kind of experience? And this is something my father told me, and these were not the worst of his experiences. He would not tell me, his own son, the worst of his experiences. And therefore, when he did the educations to students, when he went to high schools, when he spoke in churches, and incidentally, one of his favorite places to speak was John Carroll Catholic School in Baltimore. He absolutely loved the students there. They loved him. He said they were absolutely the most gracious, the most thoughtful, the most inquisitive students in that Catholic school. And so he'd go there every single year. He was invited, and every single year he looked forward to going there and educating the students. But he would only say so much. He would not tell them the absolute worst, because I'm not sure that he thought people could handle the worst. And I don't think he thought people at that age could handle the worst of his experiences. I'm not sure how he could handle the worst of his experiences. That's why, a survivor, how could you possibly handle this? And he always said, he survived, and he talks about it for those who are no longer alive to be able to speak about those experiences. I mean, he wanted to make it out of the camps so he would have proof that this actually happened. And one of the stories he told me was after the war, people were looking for brothers, for sisters, parents were looking for children, children were looking for parents, aunts and uncles. So his younger sister was in a hospital. So he went up to visit the hospital. He went to get his younger sister, my Aunt Bluma. And he traveled to the hospital, and my sister was apparently on the second floor. It was just a hospital full of women. There was just Jewish women there. There was nobody else. So my father called up, and he hears this voice screaming down to him saying, and his name was Monik. That was his Polish name, Moniek, Monik. So Monik. And this woman comes running out, and from the first floor, she jumps down on my father on the steps, and they roll down the floor onto the ground floor. That he could have broken bones, but the woman leaped on him. It turned out it was his best friend's sister from his hometown. And his best friend's sister told my father she thought he was the last Jewish boy left alive in the world, that he was it. So you have to forgive me for getting a little emotional. That in other stories are really, it tells you how important life is and what had happened. And when somebody can actually,
Jake, Jake, I like your father's approach. Likewise, I don't need to show the blood and the
right,
and the bodies. What's good about letters and postcards, it leaves the students up to have some imagination and to think about on their own pace. What does a letter mean? The words, like the translation of this Mina Singer postcard. There's a lot of praying. I mean, it was almost like a poem where she's praying for people. I pray. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be alive. The translation is extremely powerful and sad, but hopeful.
Right.
Sad and hopeful. It was a mixed emotion. And the tiny print trying to squeeze in. I try to tell students, you're only allowed in some cases to write very few words. In this case, Mina had a lot of privileges, and she was able to, well, this is actually in the ghetto, but she was able to squeeze her whole emotions in tiny, tiny words, just so you could see right in front of you. So I don't need to show a lot. I do show, when I have shown the Mina Singer exhibit, the material, I do show the photo because you really can't see it graphically, but you can see what was taking place after the war, how you get the Allied forces, the villagers, and you get Mina Singer. But I think let the students pick up a letter, and then their assignment, by the way, is to one of two things. They can write their own essay being the letter, how they feel about being that postcard, being that witness. Or they can write a letter to that postcard. They can either be the postcard or write a letter to that postcard, how they feel about it. Or any artifact in our exhibit. So we give them that assignment. We want them to connect with this emotional piece of evidence, this witness of a postcard and a letter. Probably the only thing that remains of most people.
right.
So you don't need you don't have to, the students who are learning the Holocaust, they know, they've seen the videos in class by this time. So they let the letters take another view, another approach, another piece. So the letters and postcards are just another piece of the puzzle in Holocaust education.
Right,
But
very
nothing
much
is
so.
more powerful as having someone like Morris speaking to students. Nothing is more powerful than hearing a survivor speak, and then the hugging. I'm sure Morris loved the hugs.
He was a hugger. He was an absolute hugger. So
Yeah.
yes, and he absolutely loved the students. He loved the parents. He loved the teachers, the principals. Anybody he could hug, he would hug. And of course, it was people got emotional after listening to him, and they would come up in droves, and they would talk to him. And they, I have this stack of letters in my dad's house and also in my home, from students and other people who've written, and some people who've communicated every single year for 10 years, 20 years, who continually write, how are you, Morris? How are things going? I met you, 15 years ago, and you made such an imprint on my life from what you told me, because they still remember the experience of talking to a survivor and what that survivor communicated to them and imbued upon them about just, injustices, racism, anti-Semitism, that people need to be treated with respect and with dignity, everybody in the world, no matter who. So my father always tried to communicate that in the end, that every life is precious, every life is a world unto itself, and every single one of those worlds deserve respect and deserve dignity.
And I mean that's a pretty powerful message. One of the reasons why the project we're working with in Silver Spring, Stamp It, is also known as Stamp Out Hate. It really got legs after the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, and it was a reminder for the community that and no matter how far removed we are from what happened in the Holocaust, that there's still, we have to remain vigilant in terms of anti-Semitism. And, you know, they broadened the message a little bit to talk about hate in general, to show compassion and love. So they're now collecting stamps, not just for the 11 million that suffered through the Holocaust, but rather one to commemorate the victim of hate anywhere in the world. And so that means that they'll never stop collecting stamps, my guess is, unfortunately. But I think it's a remarkable effort to undertake, and it's a good way to highlight it. You know, but the nexus to stamps, I thought the story your dad told about sort of the post period of coming to the United States, and he struggled, I think, with coping with what he had experienced in the war. And he had one doctor who chose to treat him with prescription drugs, and then another doctor said, "Well, no, that's not going to help you. It's not going to heal you." And you know, he told him to pick up a hobby. Asked him if he had a hobby. Of course, he referenced back to being a stamp collector, and so the doctor told him to collect stamps. I hope in some way that his collection allowed him to heal enough to be the voice that he was, to be the light that he was after that. You know, you mentioned with Skokie when he was moved from just being Morris Rosen to being this advocate and this outspoken, passionate person for reminding people of exactly what happened. It's just remarkable to me. And so, I mean, being able to use the forum to be able to convey those messages and share that is important. Look at that, great pictures.
It looks like a fruit tart, or maybe the blueberry
you can
pie.
see my screen. Oh my God,
That's-
I'm sorry. I have no idea what my screen is showing. You can see my pictures?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you could see the postcard. No,
No,
oh
you're
my God,
showing
I'm
us your
sorry.
pictures now. There was a picture of you and Morris and Jake.
I don't know how that got there. I'm sorry. I don't even know how I got there.
And a blueberry pie.
And a blueberry pie.
Sorry about that. Well, I'm sorry. So you don't
No,
see the
that's
postcard
great.
anymore.
Happy to see it.
No, that's fantastic stuff. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Oh my God.
I do
Well,
want to give.
I have no idea. Well, go ahead. I'll get it back
I,
out
I
now.
was
Sorry.
I was gonna say I have to be mindful of the time, or else Heidi will zap me with a buzzer when we're done here. But you know, because we're getting up on 4 o'clock, and so there's just a couple of things that I want to do. I think that first I want to see if there's anyone out there that has questions. I see someone's got their hand up, so I think I'm supposed to. Steve Berlin had his hand up. I don't know if he had a question or not. But one of the things that I want to share before we move on is I want to share with you just some sort of Danny, if I could get you to stop sharing.
Sure. Great.
Thank you.
How's that? Is that better?
That is better.
Is that better then? So you see nothing now, right?
Right.
Is that good? Good. Sorry about that. My first
No,
time
no.
using Elmo, so I don't know how to do this stuff.
For some reason, I am not able to share. Still. So I'm going to try this again. While we do that, I did want to ask. This is a little bit of a lighter conversation. It was not something that I wanted to write in this very heavy story that I wrote commemorating Morris's life, but I think it was pretty interesting that that Morris he did Zumba 3 times a week. And there was an article about him, and it started with referring to him as Zumba King.
Yes.
And I'm trying to imagine, you know, I know at one point he said that he had he was doing Zumba 3 times a week, I guess at a local center, and these sweet ladies were there waiting for him when he showed up, almost like he was a rock star. And then I recall a little bit later on, he mentioned that the doctor told him he had to slow down a little bit, so he dropped one of his Zumba classes and then took up kickboxing. Was I right in that?
He did some kickboxing, but mostly Zumba. And he would always tell me the Zumba class at the fitness center, he was the only man and the only senior in that class. So he was doing Zumba, gosh, really up until age 97. And he would go into those classes. And I even remember when he was 94 years old, other women would corroborate this, that these women in their 30s could not keep up with him, that he was so active. And my father was always this fast walker, where whenever he went somewhere, he would always walk very fast. He was never slow. I think he felt life was important and he needed to rush along with it. And he loved Zumba, and he loved the people in the class, and the instructors loved him. And I only wish I had gone to a class with him. I live about a half an hour away from him. With my schedule, I never got the opportunity during the timeframes he went to actually attend those classes. But I spoke to the other women who took class with him, and he was very active in the class and did all the exercises. And this is, again, way up into his 90s, which was surprising. And yet, knowing him, it really wasn't that surprising.
So the reason why I thought that was pretty interesting is in talking to Phil Sager, who's a dealer in Baltimore, he mentioned he'd run into him probably in the summer of last year, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And he was grocery shopping. It may have been pre-pandemic, but he said, he was 97 years old. He wasn't using a walker. He was walking around remarkably, and the reason why I bring that up is because stamp collectors, the blessing of being a stamp collector is often a long life. And so I guess my note for those of you who are aging and don't feel quite as mobile as you used to, I can tell you there must be some great medical benefits to Zumba, and Morris was a testament to that. So
Absolutely.
okay, I've got this. I want to share this real quick, and this is, for me, I wanted to be able to. Start this first.
I hope I didn't mess you up on your sharing thing.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so I wanted to share this because, as it turns out, I mean, both people who knew Morris and people who never met him before in their life shared with me, their reflections on the article. One of the, not to pat myself on the back, but I actually got a nice letter from a gentleman who referred to it as a 3-tissue article. And he was moved by his life. He was moved by the story, and particularly appreciated the reflection on the postcard that Morris collected or purchased or got back when he was last year, and the relevance of the hobby in terms of being keepers of the past. And so I appreciated that one. So here's a picture of a younger Bob Rose. Bob, I think, is still on in with us today. He really had some remarkable things to say. Obviously, Morris is a regular attendee to NOJEX, which Bob is the chairman of that. And he referred to him as a gentleman of the old school, always charming, bright, despite the horror that he lived through as a young man. Morris was a very special person. We will miss him. Bob shared with me personally that his wife, Ellen, had spent time with Morris doing some research about where her family came from in Eastern Europe. And he was really quite helpful in helping her be able to go back and reconnect with some familiar roots in Europe. Mike Pfeiffer, who is the secretary of the Baltimore Philatelic Society, where Morris was a member, sent a very nice email. I pulled out, I'm lifting quotes from this because I didn't want to share everything necessarily. But, consistently, one of the things that people always say about Morris was that two things which I find remarkable. One is that he was a true gentleman, and how much his presence created such a positive influence on them in so many ways. And Mike was one of those guys that shared that with me. I pulled the picture of President Obama. We couldn't use that in the AP because it's a copyrighted photo, but the story really was, it really made me laugh. But this young lady is the daughter of Carl Snyder, who's a dealer that had a booth at Ballpex every year. And Morris would have Olympic pins from countries that were nominated for, but didn't become an Olympic location. And so he would gift one to her every year when he would see her at Ballpex. And she talked about how he engaged her because she was going to become a classroom educator and always asked questions about her students, her classroom. And she was really moved by the story. And she said, "You have no idea how great he is." It was really refreshing to know that he always took time out for everyone and shared with them. Larry Nelson sent me a postcard. He talked about how, same thing, he met him at Nojex, and that the card he got was from Debrawa. And what was really interesting about the story is that the lady that received the card wasn't supposed to keep it. She was supposed to dispose of it. And so she kept it in her shoe. She disobeyed orders, and she received 50 lashes. And Morris went on to share with him that she was allowed to keep the card because she was going to die anyway. And so that card still preserved and is in the hands of someone who's taking good care of it today. And hopefully that will continue on. But he sent me an image of the card, and you can see the aging of it. You can see the look of it. And Danny, I mean, this looks a lot like the postcard you shared with us as well. I noted that when you showed that
Yes, in the
picture.
same town. Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
interesting. Yes. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I'm guessing that, and Justin shared with me that the Nazis would have people in the ghettos send notes out to family members who were in other parts of Europe or had escaped Germany or Poland to let them know, they would basically trickle them out as sort of a way of giving them false hope that they were healthy, that they were in good shape, that everything was going fine. And as you noted and Jake noted as well, that there are sort of coded messages in those postcards. So you can see just how important that communication was in terms of being able to keep people updated on what was happening during this incredibly tragic period. Jim Mazeppa, who is the chairman of our international committee, knew Morris through Chicago PEX and Polpex. He said something really interesting that I wanted to share, is that I recall his warm, almost impish smile that covered an intensity that, until I read your article, I did not know its source. And so it's interesting, Danny, you reflected on this, that sometimes people don't talk about things. So I don't think Morris was ever shy about it, but even people who knew him in the hobby or ran into him in the hobby didn't necessarily know his whole story the way that we know it. And of course, I brought the picture back of Michael and Hannah with Morris. Mark Mastrona, who is the president of Sports Philatelist International, who I know is in the room with us today. Morris and I knew each other since the 90s. Morris got the chance to be the U.S. commissioner to Olympilex in 1992 in Barcelona. And he was probably better known for his Olympic collection than for his Holocaust collection. And he had exhibits, and I told Jake this when I was doing research on this. Morris's sale, when the Olympic collection went up for sale, it's still the provenance for stamps that are being sold today. So you'll look at a catalog and it refers back to that sale of that material. So it must have been, if that's the case, it's obviously a remarkable collection. And so, but he ended it with what I've consistently heard: Morris was quite a character. Justin, I wanted to bring this one back. I don't think I can convey in the conversation, I quoted some of this, but the last paragraph, whenever I had a question, I could just call and talk to him. He had an answer and a story every time. I miss him. And I don't think I can adequately convey the warmth, the sadness that Justin had when we talked about Morris and when he said that. And he said it several times. He really just misses him. And I know that there are people on this, I know that Danny and Jake, I know you feel the same way, and you certainly do understand that sentiment. But I want to thank everyone that that shared with me their reflections and their time. And Jake and Danny, I really want to thank you. I know we could do another hour of this and tell more stories and spend more time. And I think it would be educational and entertaining for everyone that's listening. Um, can we do this? Can we do final thoughts? And then I don't see any questions in the chat box, and Heidi, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. Um,
I like to say one thing that I think Morris, we talked about it once. Holocaust survivors like Morris, they don't want to be defined by being a Holocaust survivor. They want to tell their story, but they don't want to be defined that. They wanted to live a life the best they could, respect the pain and suffering, but they don't want to be defined by it. So I think collecting the Olympics was a great escape for Morris. And many survivors want you to know that they do have a good life now. And they did have a life. They were allowed to laugh. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to have a great sense of humor. It's okay to love blueberry pie and enjoy the joys of cooking. So I think Morris represents a Holocaust survivor that I look up to very, very much, that they're not defined. There's much more to a human being than just being a survivor of a horrible breakdown of humanity. And that's what the Holocaust was, a breakdown of humanity. And yet people like Morris Rosen, they thrived. They thrived.
Yeah, it's interesting, something you mentioned, Danny, that, Holocaust survivors shouldn't be defined by just being a survivor, because they had their life in Europe, and then they had their new life elsewhere, wherever they eventually emigrated to, whether it was the United States, China, elsewhere, other countries. But one of the things that strikes me that I just want to mention, my father absolutely had a sense of humor. And it's almost surprising to know that a Holocaust survivor who survived these horrors could have a sense of humor, but he did. And he loved a good joke. And I guess one of the last things I want to mention regarding his sense of humor is, growing up, we would go to these restaurants in Baltimore. And the Baltimore waitresses had a particular accent. They call everybody hun. So my father would look through the menu. The waitress would come up. She'd look at my dad and say, "What are you having today, hun?" And my father would tell her what he was looking for, what we all wanted to eat. And then she said, because she heard the thick Polish accent, she said, "Where are you from, hun?" And my father would look up at her and say, "Texas." And that just cracked me up every single time he said the word Texas to his thick Polish accent. And you know what? He never got a question back about it. Maybe they believed him, I don't know. But he absolutely had a good sense of humor and was happy to share that with people. So that was just part and parcel of his personality.
and because of philately, not because of the Holocaust, Jake, I want to say this to you. You're a member of our family now, and I hope that as life starts to get a little bit more manageable for you, I know you've got one child out of college and another one soon to be, uh, and just a brag point, since your daughter is a fellow alum of the University of Maryland, she's obviously, they let me in because I live nearby and all of that stuff. They felt sorry for me probably, but the standards are much higher now. So she must be an incredibly brilliant young lady. But I know that as life is starting to change for you too, and it's getting hopefully a little bit more manageable. I do hope that you're able to pick up the collecting piece of this and to honor that, because that 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 postcard coming back to your dad is the takeaway. He's not defined by the Holocaust. He's defined by what he did, and what we all do as collectors, and that is, we're preserving a piece of history, but we're entrusted with it for so long, and then it has to be carried by somebody else. And I know that we've talked a bit about your dad's collection and whether or not you're going to carry that on. I hope you do. I want everybody to be a stamp collector in this world because I want everyone to honor the individual history of people and be that guardian of that. And I think that you're more than capable of carrying that on for him. Public shaming, I guess. But Danny and Danny, I want to thank you very much, not just for joining us today, but for the work that you're doing, for the preservation work, for the education work that you're doing. You're making up for lost time for being a subpar student by trying to be an excellent teacher. And so I really do appreciate the work that you're doing on that. I'm not kidding. I know that based on the conversations that I've had, this has been one of the most personally involved stories I've ever dug into before. And I was able to spend a lot of time with people who spent time with Morris and know that you're right. The Holocaust doesn't define who he is. It shaped who he was. And that person turned out to be a pretty darn good person. And I think we're all better for having him in this world.
Thank you
and I
so
can't
much,
thank you
Scott.
all enough.
And thank you and Danny and Heidi for this reminiscence about my father and the ability to go forward and project that. And I certainly appreciate it. And my dad would have loved it.
I appreciate that. All right, Heidi, we're going to turn it back over to you. Thank you all very much for joining us today. It was really an honor to be able to do this. Thank you.
Truly. And if everyone would please join me in thanking Jake Rosen, Danny, Jeff Spungen, and Scott English for watching. And please, gentlemen, if you'll have a look in the chat box, I'm sure you'll receive your accolades. Thanks, everyone, for sharing your thoughts, whether on Facebook or YouTube. We really appreciate it. You can find Scott's article on stamps.org, as well as in the April 2021 issue of the American Philatelist. Stamp Chat is a production of the American Philatelic Society. Through the Mighty Buck campaign, we've been able to produce hundreds of hours of philatelic presentations, free and accessible to all. When you become a part of the Mighty Buck Club, you're supporting the present and the future of our hobby, and including an interactive exhibit that features postal history from the Holocaust. Be a part of history by joining the APS and becoming a member of the Mighty Buck Club. Visit stamps.org to get started. Thanks for joining us today. You can find this and more Stamp Chats on stamps.org and on the APS YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and use the comment box below the video to keep the conversation going. Until next time, on our next Stamp Chat, connect, collect, learn, and be inspired. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course on stamps.org. The APS, social since 1886. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, Jake and Scott. Thank you. And thank you,
Take
Heidi.
care. Thank you,
Thank you
Danny.
very much.
Thank you.
Heidi. Thank you so much. Thank all who listen.